Okay, so we just finished talking a little bit about Robert Arneson, who was a unique ceramic artist in that he essentially used his life as an artist to create his own autobiography through sculpture and imagery. He'll certainly play an inspirational role in our movement forward on our own self-portraits, which will be our project during our in-person class time. But I'd also like to turn to Arneson as an artist to look to who spent a lot of time studying the things around him. So in many of his sculptures, you might also see the addition of an everyday common object. Could be a soda can, a brick, even a toilet. So he was really pretty impressive when it came to these kinds of studies, as we'll refer to them. So what I'm anticipating is that your next project, the one you'll be doing on your virtual learning block day, will be to find an object to study and then recreate in clay. So these are some examples of some studies in clay from past semesters. First of all, a wide bristled brush. Okay. The next, a tube of lipstick. And third, an apple core. So all relatively interesting forms that when recreated in clay, kind of cool. So when you guys are looking for an object that you might be interested in doing for this assignment, I'd like you to think of several things. First thing is look for something that has an interesting form. And when I say form, I mean a three-dimensional shape. So for example, a circle is a two-dimensional shape, whereas a sphere is a three-dimensional form. So look for something that has an interesting three-dimensional shape or form. Secondly, look for an object that's easily recognizable. Something that most people have come in contact with at some point or another. And this is going to make the task of recreating it a bit easier so that others looking at it when it is complete will understand what it is. So for example, a hammer, pretty universally recognized as a tool we use in construction. Whereas a loop tool might only be recognizable to someone who has taken a ceramics class before. Third, choose an object that won't be too delicate or fragile to recreate in clay. So remember that as clay gets drier, it becomes more brittle and is more prone to breaking. So therefore, anything being made that is too thin, too slender, may be more prone to breaking and therefore getting you more frustrated, whereas something with a little more heft, a little more chunk at its core is going to be stronger, okay? So some examples of items that you guys might find around your house that you could use for this assignment. And again, these are just examples. I want you guys to go out and find your own object. A glue bottle, okay? So again, has a three-dimensional form that is not too skinny at any point and has some interesting additions to that form, like the tip of the glue bottle, and also really interesting textures and design on the label. So this could be a good object that is not too complex in form, but still has some really interesting elements that can play into your assignment. A tape measure. So look at all the little kind of fun doodads on the outside of it, including the clip, including the little lever that holds the tape in place, okay? The tape itself, just the general overall shape of it, okay? So a little blocky, but has some differences from side to side, and again, an interesting label and some interesting textures on it. If you're going a more natural object route, something like a seashell or a sand dollar, maybe you go outside and find some things like acorns, sweet gumballs, anything that is kind of chunky, more three-dimensional would certainly be a good item to use for this. I was looking around my room too, and I found a tea bag, which, you know, it has some skinny, slender components, but if I was going to try to recreate this main part in clay, I think that would be a really interesting assignment. Okay, candy is also a good thing to use as a study. So even something like this that has a wrapper and then some different maybe texture on the inside, I could use kind of the wrapper to my benefit, maybe crunch that around the candy and then use that as my study. So both the wrapper and the candy itself. Objects like clips. Now again, this might be something that some of you look at and say, ooh, that looks way too complicated. Whereas others might look at this and say, oh, that would be really interesting to try to do in clay. So use your own judgment and decide for yourself, what do you feel comfortable attempting and what is maybe a little bit beyond your idea of what's accomplishable. So in terms of things that I want you to avoid doing, again, things that are maybe a little too fragile, a little too delicate because they're really skinny or just very flat, slender. Straw, pencil, great common objects that are easily recognized by people. But again, things that just are a little too flimsy that when made in clay might not work out so well, might want to snap. Okay. Sports balls. We play our sports, we enjoy them greatly. However, in terms of interesting form, this is not what I'm looking for. Even ones that might have some interesting textures on them, I want you guys to look for something a little more complex. So a light bulb, by comparison, even though it has that nice rounded surface at the top, once you get to the bottom, has a little bit more going on. All right, so opt for something, like I said, that has a little more visual interest in terms of its form. Finally, phones, or really any technological device that kind of falls into this category. Could be an iPod, could be, I don't know, what do you call those things that you stick in your computers? Hard drives. Okay, try to avoid things that fall into that category because in many cases, they're not really interesting forms. They're kind of like, I don't know, just slender little boxes with maybe a few buttons on. Now, at this point, we've talked about several different ways of working in clay. We've talked about rolling slabs, we've talked about adding texture into slabs, and we've talked about pinching. We've also talked about attaching two pieces of clay together. All of these things can benefit you in creating your study of your object, okay? So if I'm gonna take an approach and attempt to recreate this form, I might start with a basic ball of clay. Now, looking at this, I can see that's the general shape of the top of my light bulb, but then what happens when it gets down to here? Well, if I'm starting from just a ball of clay, I might use my fingers as my primary tool and begin pinching that portion of the light bulb out. Because overall this is a relatively smooth object, I just want to continue working over the surface to round that out and clean that surface up, much like what I see here. All right, so this is where I am just after a little bit of pinching and just a very small amount of refining or cleaning the details up. Now, I certainly haven't gotten into adding the details of the base of the light bulb, but that will come. Okay, another way I could approach this project is by taking two pieces of clay and attaching them together. First, I want to make sure that each piece is about the right shape and size that I want for that item. So that's the top of my light bulb there. I ended up making just a little bit of a point right here for where it will go down into the base of the light bulb. So just two very simple shapes that I can then score and slip together. And when you get that well attached, just go ahead and pull your thumb over that seam and connect those two pieces really well.